Welcome to Plants in Paradise, a weekly show sponsored by the City of Key West to help you keep your plants and garden growing. Now, here's your host, Landscape Coordinator for the City of Key West, Kathy Wolf.
Welcome to Plants in Paradise, a show that is designed to look at some of the different aspects of our tropical environment and the plants in it. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about plant propagation. A lot of people in the Keys are interested in plants and growing them, and I find that after a long period of time, or after getting used to the plants, people are trading them like baseball cards. So I'm going to give you some techniques to use to duplicate the plants that you enjoy and have an opportunity to share those with your friends. Today I'll talk about how to propagate plants with seed and also with cuttings. And I hope at a later show I'll be able to talk some more about grafting and air layers and some of the other techniques that people in the Keys use. I work for the City of Key West and have been operating a small shade house nursery operation for a little while. And the results of that, and talking with different people in the Keys, members of the Key West Garden Club, the information I've pulled together, I'll share with you today. The first thing to remember when working with plants and trying to duplicate them and grow others from the ones you have is that it takes a lot of experimentation. It takes a lot of time and patience to find out what works and what won't work. About 90% of all the plant study done in the world has been done in temperate areas, in areas much further north of where we live. On the other hand, about 90% of all of the plant types in the world grow in the tropics. So again, I'd like to mention, you may not have success with all plants using any technique, but keep trying and have patience, and eventually things will come about. First thing to mention, when working with plants, be it propagating, be it just general care, have an area, a space set aside where you can work and also have all your materials together. An example, I've got a bench that I'm using today, and to have everything within reach and available makes things much easier to work with. There's one material that I'll be mentioning all throughout this evening's show, and it's called perlite. Let's see if we can get a close-up on that material. Now, perlite is a very good growing medium for young plants, for seeds, for cuttings, because it is quite light, it's porous, it drains well, and yet it holds moisture. Let me bring a little bit of this out of the sack. What it is, it's a volcanic rock that is mined in some parts of the world. It's crushed and then heated to a very, very high temperature. And once that happens, the rock actually puffs, like puffed wheat or puffed rice. Hence, it is light, porous, and again, I want to emphasize that it is good for plants because of its drainage qualities. Water is held by the perlite, but it is not provide an environment that is totally soaked and one that roots may have trouble growing in because of the high moisture. Another important thing to remember is the perlite has no nutritional value. Whatever the plants require, you have to feed in addition to the material that the roots are in. Okay, let me start out with seeds, how to start plants from seeds. And I'm sure many of you have tried this before, ranging from experiments with vegetable gardening on up to growing trees and shrubs on your own from other plants. Seeds are a type of, or a result of sexual reproduction in plants. And that adds a little element of surprise. You don't always get an exact copy of the parent plant. There are some people that have taken that to an extreme as a hobby, the plant hybridizers that take different color shades, different varieties, and by working with them and working with the flowers, they are able to produce different types of plants that other gardeners may enjoy. As you collect seed, there's a few things to remember about it. First of all, the viability, the condition or the characteristic of the seed that determines how much of it will germinate varies quite a bit from plant to plant. Some plants are viable, or some seeds are viable for, say, a few days to a few weeks. On the other extreme, I recently read about a plant called the lupin, grows up north. Some seeds of an Arctic lupin were found in some frozen material in the Yukon territories. Well, the scientists thawed out the plants, or thawed out the seeds. 12 years later, they tried sprouting them and had success, very good success. And some people dated these seeds, tried to figure out how old they were, and found that they were probably on a flower about 8,000 years ago. So again, two extremes. And viability, no matter how many times you try, occasionally you run into a batch of seeds that just will not germinate for various reasons. You'll have the best success when using seeds, plant seeds, if they are fresh. The sooner you can get them into the perlite after they're removed from the plant, the better. Now, there are quite a few seeds on plants in the Keys that have a fruit around them. And it's very important to remove that fruit, to completely remove the flesh, say a soursop or an avocado, that type of plant. Remove the flesh so that you have a dry seed. And the next step then is to let that seed dry for a couple of days in a shady area. If you put it out in the sun, it's too hot and you may lose the viability. So you want to keep that plant or that seed in a dry, dark area. If you are unable to plant the seeds in the near future, it's a good idea to store them in an environment that is dark, cool, and dry. Now, the best place to do that is in your refrigerator. Again, remove all the pulp, dry the seed, put them into, say, a Tupperware container, put them in the refrigerator, and they should last a long time. Okay, some of the different types of seeds. I have a range of different things with me today, this evening. First of all, there is one growing around us in the Keys that is unusual and very, very worthy of mention here, since we're talking about different types of propagation and plant reproduction. You probably recognize this. This is the seed pods from the red mangrove. Find them growing all along the shoreline and canal areas throughout the Keys. Now, the plant was in bloom a couple of months ago, a tiny yellow flower, and the result of that is this fruit. This is actually the fruit of the mangrove, the red mangrove. Now, since the red mangrove grows in an environment that is very, very difficult for plants, it has evolved a technique to ensure that the young plants have a better chance of survival. What happens is the young red mangrove germinates. The seed germinates while it is on the plant. Over a short period of time, that young plant, this is not a seed pod, it's actually a brand new plant, a young plant. It grows and extends and eventually will drop off the plant. Now, the result of that is what you see on the beach and floating around the shorelines. It's called a propagule, a long pencil-shaped sort of structure. Now, this thing can float around for up to a year, and they have been known to float hundreds and hundreds of miles. So this drifts around. When it touches the ground, substrate somewhere, these roots come out immediately. The plant taps in, new leaves come out, and in a very short time you have a new red mangrove tree. Another type of seed we see all around us in the Keys, unfortunately we're losing a number of them, is the coconut. The disease lethal yellowing is sweeping through the Keys and for the most part is killing Jamaica tall palms. There are coconut palms that are resistant to the disease. This is one of those, called a maypan, There's another variety, the Malayan dwarf palm, and the Malayans come in a variety of colors. You can get them in a yellow phase, green, or sort of an orange, a rusty orange kind of color. But many people are sprouting new seeds, new trees, and I'll give you a few hints on that. First of all, the seeds are available through the Monroe County Extension Office. They are selling both Malayan seeds and maypans. Orders are going in occasionally to Jamaica, and they'd be happy to give you information on purchasing the seed. Also, if you have a friend that has a Malayan palm that is producing seed, they breed almost 100% true. So, in other words, if you collect seeds off of a known Malayan, you will have Malayan trees. All right, planting them. First of all, it is important that a portion, at least half, closer to 2/3 of the seed is embedded in some sort of material, be it soil, wood chips, seaweed, whatever. It doesn't matter which orientation you use. Some people put the seed vertically, but it's very important to remember the part that comes off of the stalk has to be up. Now, other people are germinating the seeds on the side, again, with the growing material covering about half the seed. And when that happens, the roots and stem will orient themselves so that they're going in the same directions or going in their natural directions. The condition that causes this coconut seed to start growing is an internal temperature. So these should be out in the full sun because that internal temperature has to reach 120 degrees before the tree or before the seed will sprout. Off of the tree, it takes approximately 2 to 3 months minimum, up to a year before the coconut will sprout. Once it does start growing, there is plenty of food inside the plant to keep it healthy for about 6 months. After that time, you will need to fertilize to keep your plant going and growing green. Let's see. Again, I'd like to mention that we're losing a lot of coconuts through or to lethal yellowing. And it's important, I think, that we replant and keep our tropical atmosphere. You can do that by growing either Malayan or maypan seeds and trees. Now I'll go back to the more typical seeds that you'll find and may want to germinate. First of all, remember freshness. The sooner you can get the seed from the plant into the ground, the better. The less delay there is, the better chance you will have of those seeds sprouting. Another thing, remember to keep them clean. If it has any fruity pulp on it, take that off. The reason for that is as the seed is growing or as it is germinating, there's a disease called damping off, and what it is a fungus that grows on the seed and may prevent it from germinating. The more food, such as a flesh, around the seed, the more likely you will have problems with damping off. Going back to perlite, when germinating seeds, it's a good idea to have this medium. Sand's another possibility, but you need something that drains water very quickly and yet holds just enough water to keep the seeds and the young plants moist. Another thing to consider is shade. I've had the best success with all types of plants growing seeds in the shade. I use a shade house that has about a 70% shade cloth. It means only 30% of the light comes into the growing area. And even plants that as adults do quite well in full sun, even they are have better germination rates and do better when they're young, when they're in a heavy shade situation. The seeds, the planting depth, let's see, don't have any with me. Generally dry seeds, those that don't have any fruity pulp around them, sprinkle them on top of the perlite and keep it damp, keep it moist. You don't need to bury them very deeply. Fruits that are wider, thicker, say, or like pits of avocado or that type of thing, should be planted with a little more depth. The general rule is about 1 times the width of the seed as a depth into the perlite. The container is important. Now, as a home hobbyist or a home grower, you don't have to be quite as concerned about efficiency of your growing system. Most nurseries don't have the time or the money to take a lot of care of their plants, but I've had good success growing these plants or growing seeds in containers that are quite deep and with perlite up to within about an inch of the surface or inch of the top of the container. Many nurseries grow their seeds in large, shallow flats, and I found that I have better success in a deeper container. It allows the plant to develop a little better root system, and that helps when you're transplanting it to a pot and to dirt, and they do much better that way. As these seeds are growing, the young plants are growing, many of them deplete the amount of food that is stored in their seed. So it is important to keep feeding them as you go on and to keep them healthy. Now, one type of fertilizer that's available is very good for this. It's called Peters. I've got a small container of it here. You can't mistake it for any other fertilizer. It has this bright blue color, usually about a 20-20-20 formula. There we go, a little better color, okay. 20-20-20 formula, you want to use a very dilute solution of this and use it every time you water these young plants. Most plants like a steady, constant feeding, light feeding, rather than an occasional heavy one. As you transplant the seeds, try to use plastic pots. I've used metal and have found that they rust, the roots bind up in the metal, and you have trouble moving the plant and not damaging it. And finally, one tip that I learned through a couple of mistakes, at all phases of working with your plants, be it the seeds, transplanting to the pots, whatever, you want to be sure to keep these elevated off the ground. As these plants are growing, the roots are seeking out nutrients, and they will grow right through the pot down into the ground. Later on, when you come along and pull them up and destroy those roots, it's quite a shock and a setback to your plant, and it may not be as healthy. Well, I've covered propagating plants from seed, and this evening, before we're finished, I'll talk a little bit about how to propagate plants from cuttings. But right now, we're ready for a break, and thank you for tuning in to Plants in Paradise. We'll be back in a few moments. Welcome again to Plants in Paradise. As I started out the show with a type of, or a way of duplicating plants or growing new ones through seeds, I want to finish out this evening's show by talking a little bit about cuttings and how you can grow new plants from those. First of all, cuttings is a technique a little different from using seeds because you are actually cloning the plant. The new plant that is a result of using a cutting is an exact copy of the parent. Now, what does that mean? Well, you want to be sure to select a plant, a parent plant, that is healthy, looks good, and has the same type of growth characteristics that you want to see again in the result of your cutting work. Generally, when selecting a plant for a cutting, you want to use one that is not too old. It's still vigorous, it's young, it's healthy, and if you use one that is too old, sometimes they have just burned themselves out. There's not much food left in their tissues to form new roots and to give you a new plant. The whole idea behind using cuttings or success with cuttings is to reduce the shock to a plant. What I mean by that is when you cut off a branch, say this for example, I've got a green buttonwood branch that I removed from a bush earlier today. When you remove this plant, it is no longer getting water through its root system. And the more water that it loses out of the leaves in the full sunlight, the less chance you will have of success with this plant. So a couple of things to consider. First of all, you might want to take the cuttings in the morning. That's a time when the plant is still, its photosynthesis process is very slow. It's not losing much moisture to the environment. Also, as soon as you take the cutting, you might want to plunge it into water. Keep it in a very moist environment. Whatever you do, don't cut it and let it lie in the full sun for an hour or two before you put it in the potting medium. You won't have much luck with that. In taking a cutting, it's important the location of where the cutting is along the branch. First of all, most trees, most shrubs have an area where the new growth, which is green, which is soft, and not very old, a couple of months to a few months old, fades into the older wood that is brown. It has bark, and it has some stored food in there. Now that's what you want to tap into. You need a little bit of that new growth, but definitely take quite a bit of the hardwood. It has the capability of producing better roots and more roots than the young green new growth. Let me see if I can clip this down in a hurry and show you what you want to get for a good cutting. Once you have your cuttings, again, having a growing medium that drains well and yet retains some moisture is important. Again, I use perlite, and it seems to be the way to go. Have the best success in most situations using perlite. Sand is another possibility. Also, shade again. 70% shade has given me good results. And once these plants do set up some roots, they need food, just like the seedling plants. And Peters, the soluble fertilizer that you add each time you water the plant, is another good choice there. Okay, we have a cutting. And some people will say, for instance, we're going to put this about that deep into the potting medium, into the perlite. Well, some people will leave leaves along the whole length of that branch. I know it's painful to cut those off, but it's really a better idea to take those leaves off. Again, there's no roots to pull in moisture when you're just starting here. All of these leaves are losing water to the air, and it's much better to have just a few on the top to feed the plant and yet not lose all that moisture to the environment. Now, there are some plants, say hibiscus, for instance, and I might mention I brought in a hibiscus that was a cutting. You can see about 8 inches above the ground. This was a cutting about 8 months ago. So you can see what results you can have in the right conditions. I should also mention that cuttings sometimes are an advantage over using seeds because you can get a larger plant in a shorter amount of time. Okay, back to our little cutting here. Some plants, it's not that important, it's not that critical where you take the cutting. Others that are more difficult, remember that green wood and hardwood combination. Also, this is something that I guess is obvious, but occasionally I run into it. One time I had some helpers working with me in the nursery, and they started cutting up these branches, threw them on a stack, and after a while they couldn't figure out which end was the bottom and which was the top. Well, there's a definite polarity in this branch, and if you stick it in the ground upside down, you may get a plant, but it'd be a very twisted, ugly-looking sort of thing. So keep that in mind. Now, as I said, starting out here, it's important to keep this plant from losing too much water, from going into shock. If it's moist, if it's happy, it will put out roots. So you want to remember that. Keep that in a moist environment, keep it damp, and it will do much better. Well, I have brought in some different materials. Pitch apple here, another plant that is a cutting. And we talked a little bit about seeds and how you can grow plants from either type. Give it a try. Remember, the experimentation takes time, takes patience, but it's a lot of fun, and your friends will enjoy it. Thanks for coming by or tuning in tonight with Plants in Paradise, and I'll see you again next week.
Plants in Paradise is sponsored by the City of Key West. Gardening product brand names are used for informational purposes only. Such mention does not constitute an endorsement of a product over others that may do the same job while used in a similar manner. Questions or comments on today's show can be sent to this station, Telecommunications Incorporated, 1700 North Roosevelt Boulevard, Key West, Florida, 33040.